Hi, everyone, and welcome to School to Startup, a series where we explore how leading academicians are shaping innovation, entrepreneurship, and the next generation of change makers. I'm your host, Tanushi, and today I'm thrilled to be speaking with Professor Jaideep Prabhu, Professor of Marketing at Judge Business School, University of Cambridge. His work revolves around frugal innovation, emerging markets, and entrepreneurship that has got a global impact. Professor Prabhu, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tanushi. It's a great pleasure to be talking to you.
Awesome. Let's get started and let's talk from the beginning itself. So, can you tell me and tell us a little bit about your journey, what led you to academia, and how has been your experience over the years in your journey?
Yeah, so I grew up in India and lived in different parts of the country and then did my undergraduate studies at IIT Delhi. And when I graduated, this was in 1989, before India's liberalization began. And the choice was either you stayed in India or you went abroad. It was a sort of either or. And I decided to go abroad. I went to the US and got a PhD. I switched from engineering to business. I got a PhD at the University of Southern California in LA. And once you commit to a PhD, you are more or less committing to an academic career. Some people do leave and go and work in industry, but I quite liked the idea of research, teaching, being in a university, and also in a way you have many options of where to teach and so on. So I first got a job at UCLA in LA in the business school there. Then there was an opportunity to move to the Netherlands, so I taught there for a while. Then I came to the UK. I was in Cambridge for a few years. Then I went to Imperial College in London and then returned to Cambridge. So that's been my career, and I've always been in academics, always been in a business school.
That's an inspiring story, sir. We have seen that you are also part of multiple projects and research initiatives. So, building on that, I'd love to know more about these kind of, research projects that you have, that you are currently working on, and what is driving you in these.
Yeah, a big part of being an academic is research. And actually, one of the nice things about being an academic is you get a lot of freedom to decide what you work on, with whom, where you publish, what sort of issues you look at. So throughout my career, I've been interested in innovation. That's been my sort of main area of interest. And in the first part of my career, I studied innovation in large Western corporations in high-tech sectors like pharmaceuticals, banking, etc. But then in maybe about 2008 or so, I became interested in innovation in emerging economies like India. And when I began to study innovation there, I became very aware of this idea of frugal innovation, or Jugaad as we call it in India. So how people from villages to cities, from small companies to large companies, or even in the public sector, are able to do more with less. Basically use limited resources, get the most out of them, and to create highly affordable solutions in many different sectors. So I became very interested in that, was researching that with co-authors. I wrote a book about Jugaad innovation, which was all about how Western companies coming to emerging markets could learn from their emerging market counterparts, how to innovate faster, better, and cheaper for those markets. That book came out in 2012. After that book came out, my co-author and I, we realized there was a lot of interest in this idea of frugal innovation in the West, for the West. So we started to look at that, and we looked at how large Western corporations were increasingly trying to be frugal alongside being, doing more R&D driven innovation. And then we wrote a second book called Frugal Innovation, which was about Western corporations doing frugal innovation. So I began to talk a lot about these kinds of things and write about these kinds of issues. And then people would always ask me, so what are the implications for governments? So I began to think about that, and then I wrote a follow-up book, which was about innovation in government and how governments around the world are doing innovation in this kind of frugal way, and how they're also regulating such innovations in society and in the economy. So over the last 10 or 15 years, that's been my focus, researching frugal innovation in different contexts, in developed countries, developing countries, in small companies, in large companies, but also in the public sector.
That's great. That's great. You have also touched base upon not just the academia a little bit, but more towards how everyone in this particular ecosystem is leveraging on frugal innovation, right? And the books that you have mentioned, I'm sure our audience would love to dive into it. But tell me something. Your students, or if I have to say researchers who are associated with you, your co-authors, they might have come up with, they have read about your articles, read about the book, and also having your daily one-on-one interactions. There seems to be a lot of exchange of powerful ideas when it comes to innovation. Have you come across any such ideas, any such student-led projects or startups that are possibly growing within the university itself? Come across any kind of such stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So I could talk about several. Let me maybe talk about three in particular. So first is a former PhD student of mine, Toby Norman. He was very interested in public health issues, and he had noticed that in a lot of public health campaigns, particularly in developing countries, when the vaccination teams, for instance, go to rural areas, they may not have, they may not know the person, the identity of the person in front of them, the mother, the child, etc. In any case, the records, the medical records, would probably sit in the district hospital, which is some distance away. So they said, how would we identify people like this? So maybe we can use their fingerprint as an ID, and then the doctors in the village, in the program, the vaccination program, might have a mobile phone. So maybe we have a device that can read the visual information of the fingerprint, convert it into text, and then the mobile phone can text that information to the district headquarters. They can pull up the medical information and send it via mobile to the doctor in the village. So that was the intuition. And then while they were doing their PhD, the small team was able to refine, create a prototype device, improve it, get funding, and then they set up their own social business called SIM Prints. So SIM like a SIM card and prints as in fingerprint. And now it's a very large, successful social business. They do very big programs around the world, working with governments, working with intergovernmental agencies, and so on. So that's one. Another example is of a mature student. So he was doing a part-time MBA with us, and he was at the same time teaching computer science in the university here. And he and his colleagues were very worried about the fact that fewer and fewer young people were applying to study computer science in Cambridge. And even the ones who applied had never opened a computer and played with the hardware or had done any coding. So they came up with this idea of a very cheap basic computer, microprocessor, which they call the Raspberry Pi. They thought this would make it easier for young people to tinker with hardware and code, and it would be so cheap that if they broke, it wouldn't be a big deal. So they set up this company. They thought they would sell a few thousand units. They sell millions of these, and people use these cheap computers to come up with all kinds of other devices. So that's the Raspberry Pi. A third example is of another mature student, an MBA student of mine. He wrote his MBA thesis on retail, on the retail sector in the UK. And based on that research, he then set up a company called Gusto, which is a recipe box company. So the idea is that a lot of people are very busy. People with kids are very busy, but they worry about giving healthy food to their kids and their family, and they may not have time or the bandwidth to every day think of what they're going to cook fresh. And this is why people tend to do takeaways and eat processed food, and that's of course not very healthy. So the idea of Gusto is that it's all digital, it's all online, and you go once a week. The family goes online, and you decide what recipes you want, what dishes you want for the week, and you put in your request. And then on Monday morning, you get a cardboard box delivered to your doorstep, which has all the ingredients needed for those recipes for the week, and also the recipe cards. And basically every evening, then you cook one of those recipes for your family. So this has again become very successful. It solves a real customer problem. People are willing to pay for this service, but they are also again socially and environmentally responsible, because they are promoting healthy eating, cooking as a family, and also the algorithm tries to minimize the footprint. So they source the ingredients from a limited geographical area as far as possible. They try to reduce their footprint. So those are three examples of companies of our own students.
That's very encouraging, Professor Prabhu. The thing that a lot of students are coming up with such great ideas and solving multiple kinds of problems. At the same time, are also able to make such global impact. It's always a thrill to get into these kind of stories and inspire others. What I'm curious about at this point in time is that these are certain kinds of students which start with their ideas very early. When I say very early, they get started and they probably find out about the problem in their university durations, right? In their university times. Now, while they are trying to figure out a way and implement their idea and try to bring some prototype or develop a product or something like that, what is the role of university here? How is the university supporting these kind of ideas? What kind of support is being extended? One thing that I've seen so far when it comes to support, I've seen that there are certain kind of academic courses as well at this point we are having, right? Now, what is the influence or what is the impact of those kind of academic courses as well? I would want to understand from you.
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that in a university like Cambridge, students who have ideas are supported by the university. And it would partly depend on what program they're studying. So if they're in the business school, for instance, they would get courses, They would have lots of extracurricular like events around like hackathons. They would have entrepreneurs coming in to talk to them and so on. So that's within the curriculum, and also events, networking events, and things like that. But then we also have an entrepreneurship center that has an accelerator. So if one of our students, the student teams has an idea, they can apply to the accelerator, and then they go through an accelerator program that actually provides them support with developing their idea, finding customers, finding investors, improving their pitch, thinking about the business model, what's the value proposition, all that kind of stuff. Then the university itself has a technology transfer company, which anyone in the university who has an idea can send their idea to the company, and then that company can help them to patent the idea and to potentially find a commercial outlet for it, to, for instance, license it and things like that. So there are many sort of parts of the ecosystem in the university. There are student associations which are specifically focused on entrepreneurship, and they have events and competitions and challenges and so on. So there's just a lot going on in a place like Cambridge, based around the university, but also in the ecosystem surrounding the university. And so if you look at the impact, you'll see that a place like Cambridge attracts a lot of venture capital. It creates a lot of unicorns and startups generally in a lot of different sectors. It employs a lot of people in these startups and these sectors. It attracts big companies to set up research centers here. So there are lots of very tangible, measurable impacts that such activity can have.
That's amazing. The way universities are coming together, and they are also evolving over the startup wave that we are seeing at this point in time. There is a wave of next generation courses that are coming up to support not just the startup founders, but also the students, to inculcate that kind of mindset, that entrepreneurial thinking, so that later on in life they can be functionally ready for the entrepreneurship space, right? Apart from that, Professor Prabhu, would you like to highlight a little bit about on the information in terms of what is happening in the startup ecosystem? Of course, today I have one idea and I'm building on it, but that idea is a unique idea or not. How do I see that, right? Because across the globe, we see if today I feel that my idea is very unique and nobody can copy, or nobody might have thought about it. When I get into some kind of tool, or I do some kind of search, I find out, okay, there are 100 more people out there who have already implemented, right? So we have certain kinds of research databases and tools that essentially helps students, founders, etc., to find about these kind of entrepreneurial activities. How impactful do you think it is for students to have exposure to these kind of tools early in their university time?
No, it's very important for people to have ways to test their ideas. So you're right. Anyone can have a great idea, or at least they can think it's a good idea. So they might have identified a problem. Maybe it's a problem they face, or other students face, or people in their family face, or whatever. And then they might think of a solution which might involve some technology, etc. Or they might have some research expertise that helps them come up with a technological solution. But as you said, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You have to test, is there a customer out there that's willing to pay for it? Are there competing products? Are there competing companies? Are other people solving the same problem in a better way? All this kind of stuff. So you have to do the research. And there are different ways you can do the research. You can do your own primary research. You can actually test it yourself. The accelerator program I mentioned would do a lot of that. You would be put in front of investors and customers. You may be making pitches. You get feedback, and the people who are experts in that sector will tell you about other competing products and companies. So you can do your primary research, but you also need to do secondary research. As you were saying, you would have to look at existing databases. You could look at databases like Tracxn, which have longitudinal time series data on companies across countries in different sectors, how they are able to raise capital, etc. What is their sales? What is their performance? And so that can also guide you, because you might be able to see patterns. You might be able to track competitive companies to see how they have done in terms of raising capital, in terms of growth, in terms of acquiring talent. And you can get a lot of insight from that too. So clearly you need to test your ideas, and you need to gather data, and you need to do research. And there are multiple ways to do that, including using databases.
Absolutely right. Agreed on that point. Because understanding about what's going on in the space becomes really crucial when you are actually stepping into that particular space, right? Because when you're preparing pitch decks, you definitely need a lot of analysis, right? That's great, Professor Prabhu. Zooming out a bit from here, and whatever that we have discussed essentially tells that a role of university in entrepreneurship has been evolving, and we'll see how it evolves over the time. And a lot of student entrepreneurs can make use of it, can leverage this kind of opportunity. And for those, I would like to ask you here is that for those who are just beginning their academic or entrepreneurial journey in a university like Cambridge, what advice would you like to give them to stay prepared for what's ahead?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's really hard to answer that in a very specific way, because often students will come to me for just to basically bounce their idea off me, and that is probably the role that's most common, for somebody like me talking to students. So students who have an idea, like just the other day, like a couple of days ago, I met a student who had this idea around food waste, and she's in the business school, but here in the university we have people in technical fields. She met somebody who's in a technical space who knows about sensors. which can be used in food to look at the state of whether food is fresh or whether it's got spoiled and so on. And so she just wanted to bounce that idea off me because she knows that I study innovation and entrepreneurship. She knows that I study marketing. She knows that I'm interested in issues like food waste because it's linked to frugal innovation. And so really, she was just sort of telling me about the business and I just asked questions. And then basically the process of asking questions is helping her refine her own thinking. And then I also told her about some research I'd done, which shows that when you have these early stage technologies that are not yet fully tested and proven, especially at an industrial level, it's not such a good idea to think downstream and think of the downstream customer or market, but actually go upstream and think about who are the other industrial partners that might be working on these technologies and so on. So that was very, really insightful for her. So it's hard to know exactly what a particular entrepreneur needs at a particular point in time. They probably need lots of different things. And so they are trying to make sense of a very complex landscape. And the way they do that is by having lots of conversations with different people. And then different people ask different questions, and that way, and then give them some guidance, and that way they're able to find their way in this very complex landscape. But there could be so many different things that you could have them with, the research included.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Agreed on that part as well, Professor Prabhu. So what we have done so far and discussed is, about entrepreneurial journey so far and how it led you to be speaking to a lot of startups and understanding what kind of ideas are coming in. Thank you so much for joining me in such an enriching conversation, Professor Prabhu.
It's been a great pleasure, Tanushi. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Professor Prabhu, for being with us today and sharing your wisdom. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more stories from the intersection of academia and entrepreneurship right here on School to Startup. Thank you.